Well, first of all, it's not an annexation, but the recognition of the independence of two self-proclaimed republics, the democratic, so-called democratic republics of Donetsk and the Republic of Lugansk. Now, there are 3.5 million inhabitants there, and most of them are Russian-speaking. Those who didn't want to stay in Donbass managed to, or most of them managed to re-enter Ukraine. And I've met a refugee from Donbass just yesterday who said that she didn't want to be a slave in her home country, and she left. And what she says about being a slave in her home country also reflects on the future of Ukraine as is at this point, without the Donbass and without Crimea. Given that, this is not an annexation, and this is not something that was not expected. There's been an escalation for 5 days of exchange of artillery fire between the Ukrainian army, which is entrenched in trenches, and the rebels, the pro-Russian rebels on the other side, inside the two republics. And this fighting has been going on sporadically for the past 8 years, has just intensified greatly in the past 5 days. Given that, that does not solve the issue that Putin demands to be solved. What Putin demands is actually a neutralization of Ukraine, that it won't be part of NATO on one hand, and also to roll back the NATO expansion towards Russia with the insertion of Poland, for instance, and the Baltic states inside NATO after 1997. We want these places, these countries, to be basically demilitarized. And that's another issue. This is only one of the pressure points of Vladimir Putin, but this does not solve the issue of the current crisis. The current crisis is much, much deeper, and it goes much beyond the Donbass, which has been occupied anyway through pro-Russian rebels by Russia as a puppet, as two puppet states. But this is a situation that has been existing for the past 8 years. So there is no real surprise in that step, and Putin knows that. And this is why the Western countries are just expressing disappointment, because this is not the core of the issue. This is only one chapter in the pressure toolkit that Putin is inflicting, not just on NATO, but also on Ukraine, as is actually without the Donbass and without Crimea, in order to force NATO, to force Ukraine not to be inserted inside NATO in a non-defined future, actually, because NATO's open door policy is a principle that cannot be changed. But given that, the leaders of NATO have already expressed their view that Ukraine's insertion inside NATO is not foreseeable, but Putin wants something written in marble so that it won't never be part of NATO. And this is the core issue. That doesn't mean that there is a war. I'm just standing in the street in Kyiv, okay? And restaurants are open. Everything is open. The lights are on. People are eating. I don't see any fear in the street at this moment. There is obviously fear which is kept very much inside people's chest, like Putin keeps his cards very close to his chest. They keep their fear very much inside. They are afraid for the future of Ukraine. They are afraid that Ukraine will become the battleground of influence between one superpower, the United States, and a would-be superpower, the Russian Federation. And they don't want to be a pawn in that game. The only way out that has been expressed but not negotiated at this point is that NATO will ask the Ukrainian maybe to do a referendum, to organize a referendum, that they don't want to become part of NATO. And then that would maybe take the thorn out of the crisis. Given that this is a long process and we are not at the end of this crisis, and it's basically what we are seeing right now is basically a media war with a lot of fog and a lot of disinformation from both sides, by the way. Because when you read in the New York Times this evening that the annexation of Donbass, and it's not an annexation, will set the stage for the invasion of Ukraine, I don't think we are there yet. It could happen because it's a very dangerous tactical game, but we are not there yet at this point, Benita.